as intellectuals, or even as individuals. religious persons, as we do as Buddhists, as we do as individuals, depending on time, on history, what we are as individuals, as a product of history, which we are. This is an act of signification rather than significance. Signification is to give meaning to existence and to the texts. So when we read, we somehow give new meaning to history, and we find ourselves in history. And finding, reading texts is somehow to acquire and to relate to parts of history, which is ourselves. We mirror ourselves in history, we mirror ourselves in the texts and in the manuscripts. And for many of us here who work as historians and philologists, I think it's very rewarding. And for me, visiting Thailand here is very rewarding to see how much people in general are dependent on Thai tradition and history. Well, when it comes to significance and signification, it's maybe a privilege of very few to read texts, because in religions, not only Buddhism, I would say Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, which are really very few people who read manuscripts. They read the sacred text. Who reads them? And you can see throughout history, they're not so much read when you think about all the members of a religion, how many do read those texts. And Peter and other people here working on history, we try to find this lost meaning, we try to communicate it into the present. But in the religions, in the traditions themselves, really few people reads manuscripts. So you could say the significance of manuscripts is very small. It doesn't matter. Religion lives on by its own cultural force. Religion is independent of the texts. It is just there. When we go to the temple, you pray, we do our things, we express our humbleness, our love, our admiration for what is bigger than us. And then maybe we read it here and there. But it seems that the significance of text is very, very small in that sense, because the culture of the religion is small. It's quite interesting. But maybe the function is of such texts that, well, they are there. People know they are there. And we make them into nice canonical scriptures. We organize them according to the principles and will of the learned in communication with the kings and the nobles. This is the truth of our religion. We codify it, we make canons, we put religion and manuscripts into collections, and we say, this is it. These are it. But it remains the significance of the text, of course, is important. Because here there are people working on it and signifying it, interpreting it, reading it. So there's always very few people in a religious society who really read the texts. And some of the people who read them, they just read them and they don't care so much about what it means. With all respect. You can mention, for example, the Buddhist Trivipika, isn't it? Trivipika, well, it's a conjugal and a tangible. But formally, you can say it's not a Schattenwiedergabe, but it's maybe a Schattenwiedergabe or something, or you Schatten. Say the other Wiedergabe, basket. So, it's at least more than 3 in the tradition. But, for example, it makes good sense. Sutra, say Sutra, Vinaya, Sutra, Ayana, it makes sense. But I think the fact in a living religion, which by all means the Thai is, as I have said, I have said several times, the principal, maybe the principal guardian of Buddhist tradition. I said many times here in Thailand, I mean, the way to take care of Buddhism, the living tradition of Buddhism here, I'm very moved by it. So, going back to the Tibetan reading of texts, even though there are few people who read the texts, they just read it. And the monks are paid to read through the whole thing in a number of days. And that's it. And they do note the signification part of it, to give it meaning. What does this mean? What is it? This is usually left to even a fewer intellectuals. And I think people in this room are among those having the privilege to really even know this. This is a very great privilege to delve into history, see what it is, read, ask the meaning, and not having a preconceived idea about what it means, but really reading text as open spaces to develop ourselves. This is, of course, the great pleasure of intellectuals. It's the great pleasure of philologists. And you should be aware, be aware with what privilege it is to be an intellectual. And we complain a lot in the universities. But it may be like that in a good restaurant. You can complain about the food, but in a bad restaurant you can't. So maybe we complain, and that's can appreciate in our intellectual arrogance and pride. They really just us, they don't understand this very primitive way. This is what this expression. And when it comes to it, much of what we say is just politeness, it's just rules, it's just conventions. Still we do, and some of it is good and things others obviously say, things themselves would say. But indeed, these are more than secular institutions. Of course, and it's so grand, this mass of manuscripts which we study, and we can well ask about. It's like smoke Sandra, this when we see this literature, it's just like a huge claim, and we all drown in it when we start to study these traditions of Buddhism. And they are formalized in the Pali Canon, as the Buddhika. Somebody has read it completely in Italian, and so we understand that. And this tendency in when you look at the traditions that they make apologies. So they represent this sea of manuscripts in smaller summaries. So that Buddhist literature is huge. But the process of producing canonical literature, if you follow it in Buddhist literature and the Indian history, well, first it's form, then it's written down, and grandeur of history, and at the same time the grandeur of the human being and his thinking in which is special. So, yes, make I will it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, and please don't think anything else. This is given, and the reason why it's like that, because the discourse is the truth, and this is it. So you see this negative function of canonical scripture that is limited to our thinking instead of what is used, that it will inspire us to think what we are together and individually. And that's the importance of manuscripts. Because this is supposedly that somebody very different from ourselves and very different from the canonical format into which we are born. And this is our privilege. This is the importance, so to speak, the significance of manuscripts, which should work in the way of somehow seeing ourselves in world space, temporarily, which is good for any culture. We may not have a faith, we may not have a truth in the tradition we have brought up. But sometimes it becomes stale and we feel it as therapy. Then the simplification of manuscripts, to give manuscripts, to give other historical evidences, is something which always may enrich our present. So the richness of our present life is because we are historical beings, because we are inspired by history, and because we are inspired by witnesses, which is not exactly living. And somehow the personal discovery of history, to give meaning to these stones, to the old leaves, to the figures which we see, is the miracle of the 17th century. And it has been our great privilege, I would say, my great privilege, but as Peter has said, it's been a great privilege to share this work together and to walk in the traces of triumphalism. And first, Peter is part of it, and by all means, Mr. Pasta, Kyoto, and also Sinat here, we participate in our work, and indeed, Professor Clark, thank you very much that we can do this together, that we can discover the history of roots together to enrich our lives and share it like this, like this. Thank you very much. I know that this was a very clever talk, and please be my messages, and it was only an introduction, I would say. But we can speak about the collection which is here, and please also message if you like about the findings, how they were, what they are, what kind of drawings, whatever. And so far, this is a kind of catechismus. This is a summary of our findings, you could say. But there are 3 volumes, hopefully 4 volumes soon, which is the 3 canonical scriptures of our work, but even to be expounded on everything. So, if anybody has any questions, I should say that since the focus here is about isolation, this is something their hands and the Maldives, and it's a living tradition to write like this here. And I also thank Peter for doing a great job of preserving lots of Maldives manuscripts in this part of the world. And today we are very fortunate in fact. There are many new finds. This is, as Richard Salmon says, this is a great epoch for manuscript research. Because the Australian collection is found, and even recently in Pakistan, they have found manuscripts which are so amazingly old. We say here that this is the oldest Brahmi manuscripts, but of course Ashoka, he Brahmi too, but recently they have found the Brahma literature. They say it is C14 dated from 800s. And the history of writing in India. So today there are very many files, very many things. So if you visit Norway, was to sort these small pieces according there are also found other, like Syriac and even Hebrew manuscripts in this place. And also Bactrian, which is a language from up to the 6th century. Bactrian is a Iranian language, but so in this period, from which manuscripts are found, from the 1st to the 8th century, Banya was a very active place for travel. This is the reason for it being found there. And of course, we have seen the big Buddhas, sadly go about, but here on the page of the catalog, we have some nice Russian influence, who were good in painting in our way, and they make this beautiful image of the Buddha and and the material on which this manuscripts are written, the body is always moving, like many little back, and the ink is soaked with water and through the years has petrified. And it's amazing. It's destroyed, but it's amazingly well kept, these manuscripts. So it's a very stable material, not like this paper. This breaks in a few years, but this only with the ink is very well kept. So it's a superior writing technology which has kept. And then later, north, we have a birch tree, white tree, north, and birch bark is used in Norway to make roof tiles. You have birch bark, and also birch bark, you put grass, so the walls stay in the roof. So birch bark is very fine material for roofs, but also for these manuscripts. So birch bark manuscript is used in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Gandhara. Gandhara is a bit hard to find Gandhara, but what you in general terms call it great Buddhist kingdoms after the beginning of the next century. To care for and to care of this
or is it?
Well, this activity is organized more like a network. So, Zeeman Institute in Oslo University, they are not particularly committed. So it's not, but this is somehow how much of modern academic activity works, which is for the good and for the bad. And sometimes the best and good projects are sometimes, well, how shall I say, groups of friends who want to do a particular thing. So this activity is not so much supported by my university institute. But there's another small private institute which has the potential to do this kind of research. But the ownership is private. So the center really of the ownership and taking care of this material is done privately by this collector, Martin Skøy, and it's under his protection and he takes very well care of it. So he's a private collector and what will happen with his collection is open, but I think hopefully he will donate it to some foundation or something. So you could say that the work and the organization is not deeply rooted in a university, but it's a general cooperation among people. And the committee we have set down runs it, and it's an international committee with representatives, and we do our best to bring in young people, everybody who can do this, which are not so many. I mentioned a few here, but this is the way we work. And as I initially said, it's a great privilege to work in university life, because of course my institute support me and give me this nice title, but the work again is done in the organized by ourselves rather than an institution.
And are there collections of manuscripts in other religions?
Yes. So this particular collector, he is, oh, I forgot to comment on the novel in the title. Oh, I will start this now. But this is the old history of Buddhism, but we can keep it for another time. But he really is collecting, really has a global scope. And he has great interest in collecting very important pieces. And he also has a very nice history of being a bus owner. So it also, buses are very expensive. But when you see that this bus income goes into this manuscript finance, you forgive them. But he, Mr. Skøyen, has a global scope for his collection. And he has cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia, and it's an amazing collection from the beginning of writing, 3000 before Christ, and development through graphics and into syllables, and then Sumerian, Babylonian, Aramaic, English. And then he has a Greek collection, he has a Coptic collection. It's really amazing. And how this happened in Norway, I don't know. But it shows that above the question who organizes such things is usual. When it comes to it, it's often individuals who want to do something, who has a great idea by institutions. They are really interested in keeping what they do. But the new ideas are individuals. And it's a challenge for institutions, of course, to find what are individual ideas and help such individuals. But
the University of Chicago. It's about the tablets and the uniforms and the script from Egypt.
So
it's ongoing right now.
Yes.
And I think it's on the website. That's right.
Of course, this history of writing, comparative history of writing, is a very, very interesting and grand topic which interests me personally a lot. And this collection has a huge number of writings. And I would say for this area, with all the writing systems and how they base and how languages base, this is also a great field of studies in that respect. But I shouldn't fail to mention, as I mentioned, that now there is a quite interesting time for these studies. We should be aware of that, and we should use that opportunity, because now also the great collections of Tibet are starting to be studied. And this is a huge mine of Buddhist manuscripts which are not read, not edited. So quite new Sanskrit manuscripts comes out of Tibet now, and it's a great collection. They are partly the same as the collections from the 30s. Please I should stop. You know, when I start talking, I'm sorry. But so it's a very fortunate period. And you could say that when you look at religion, it's interesting, I would say, that the spread of religion often throughout history happened in academic institutions. And the work which is done is already known. I think it also has a cultural function in Buddhism itself. And of course, you see in history that religious organizations, they usually make universities, and the universities give back to the religious institutions. This is an important dialectic which we shouldn't forget. And the universities of Japan are often supported by religious organizations. So we shouldn't be too arrogant or proud as academics. And this is also part of this exhibition here, that I could give something back to the Sangha. It's very nice. So, further with this, I mentioned here we have our Afghanistan material, we have some Pakistan material, then the huge collections in Tibet, which are starting to be part of that study. So it's a very active period of study. So, which the authorities should not forget.
Yes. You said that the manuscript that you found is written with the ink on the leaves. And have you seen any other manuscript which were written in other in other methods, like some other thing, not the ink on the leaves, like which can last very long?
Thank you for that question, because now they all know the copper here and to write on copper plates. This is, of course, the grand story of the Mahavarsha, because when King Kanishka, around 100 AD, he, as according to Talana, the Tibetan historian, Kanishka said, there are so many books around. So the success of writing under Kanishka was very interesting historically. So please tell me what is the correct form of Buddhism? And then we have the Kansin, as the sources tell us, and the Vaibhashikas. They say themselves, but maybe it's not true because Kanishka is also supported by Buddhists. So we should know this. But anyway, Huna king, the Huna. But anyway, the Huna king Toramarna, they are famous for
speak, and then all the audience that come to help us make this talk kind of very fruitful one. I myself have learned with relief about the difficulty or impossibility of kind of defining what is really literature, because I'm a literary people, and then I really appreciate that. And then I will keep thinking about it, that what is really the oral tradition and written tradition, and then how we define this kind of thing. And so then I take this opportunity to thank our great speaker. Can we give a big hand to Professor Bradley King? In the name of this organizer and Chulalongkorn University, we invited you to do some token of the friendship of a small Vidya Ganakan from Germany.